never stuck.
Never.
I'll just like see a little note and go, okay.
What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Wednesday night live stream. Today we have the one and only Adam from Frag. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Always a pleasure. So you have a podcast now, as well as my random live stream guest. And
It's true. It's on my shirt.
yeah, heck yeah. I actually tried to do the logo, but it
Well, I'll
broke
just do
my
this
streaming
the whole
software.
time. I'll just
Perfect.
stand here awkwardly holding myself up.
Yeah. So Beyond the Reef podcast, super awesome. If you guys haven't listened to it, definitely do. I get excited whenever I listen to them because it's nice to enjoy it rather than having to create everything. So it's always fun. But I figured it'd be fun because we both talk to a lot of, high-level reefers and different people. And there's a bazillion different ways to approach this hobby. You can have the simplest setup in the world, or you can be as complicated as you want. And all of these methods can work. And so we figured it'd be kind of fun to talk about, the simple, the complex, and different ways of reefing. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, totally. And I think also like talking to high-level reefers, however you want to define that, can be a little bit intimidating to people that want to, just reef in a more casual way. So where do you think is a good place to start? Like, should we start with what we consider the most low-maintenance, simple kind of reef tank?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
I guess what is the most basic, and then what's been your most basic, I guess, for two different levels?
I mean, my most basic would have been a tank that was not plumbed, didn't have a sump. So, everything was just in the tank, including the heaters, any flow pumps or whatever. But I think, obviously that's a method that can work for people, but maybe we'll talk about how to make that work. I don't know if you get much more simple than that, other than I have seen fishbowl style reefs before. That's basically just a tank with water and whatever it needs to run it. So,
my first ever reef tank was a 12-gallon Fluval Edge, which is the one with that tiny hole. It looked awesome, pain in maintenance. Had an aqua clear filter on the back with a little bag of carbon in there, and I had one of the slim neotherm heaters on the back. That was it. Like super basic. And that's probably my most basic tank ever. I don't even know if I dosed it. I think I just relied on water changes for that tank.
Yeah. And that's something I want to talk about because, a lot of people that start a simple system, they kind of just rely on water changes for making up their elements and stuff.
Yeah.
And I've always kind of felt like that will work to a point, and it's kind of dependent on the size of the water changes you're doing. Yep. But over time, you are going to eventually have, levels depleted. Unless you're doing 50% water changes sometimes, right?
So far on my new tank, my Ghani Nano, I've only done water changes because in zero dosing yet. I did order all for reef, which I'm going to do for dosing, but so far I've just 100% relied on water changes. So far so good.
Yeah, and I think that's probably if you are wanting to do a super simple tank. Do regular water changes, 20 to 25% if it's a small tank is only going to be, 4 or 5 gallons max, right?
Yeah.
Not a huge water change. And then all for reef or one of those all-in-one major element solutions is probably a good way to go. If you just need to put a couple drops or a couple mils per day kind of thing.
That's That's my plan. Like a mill or two a day is probably all I'm gonna need. Make it super duper easy.
Yeah,
which will be good.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I actually was just talking to Lou from Tropic Marin about the one part, the all for reef.
Nice.
And I guess what is it? It's calcium
formate.
Calcium formate, which just kind of allows it's the saturation that actually allows everything to get along in the same solution, which is interesting because we didn't have anything like this back in the old reefing days.
Oh, exactly. And it has trace, which I think is super cool. So I don't know. I'm excited to try it.
Totally.
Mine's in the mail, taking a sweet time to get here, but eventually we'll get some. Lou's actually my guest next week too, so it should be a good one.
Yeah, and the whole not having an overflow thing, I couldn't live without a sump again. Just having some of that nasty, unsightly stuff out of the way and, down there is it's a lot more appealing to me for sure. But there's all-in-one tanks that have a back chamber or whatever that hide some of that stuff.
I think those work pretty well. Like my current one, I am forcing myself to keep it as simple as I can. And literally just a return pump, heaters in the back. That's it. Super simple.
Yeah, totally. What's the next level from that? From
all
in one.
I have one more level of basic.
Okay.
This is the most basic tank I ever saw. It was on a desk, lit by the sun, and it was basically a pulsing Xenia tank.
Yeah.
I think they might add a heater and a power, and that was it. And it was just literally just sunlight, just like pulse this, nothing but xenia in the tank. And it was actually kind of cool in a very odd, simple way.
Yeah.
If I had like a desk tank by a window at work, I'd almost try that just for fun. But
yeah, I mean, I would say, not to offend anyone, that's probably still more interesting than most houseplants, you know? So
I'm not gonna lie, I refuse to put in my mixed reefs, but I absolutely love watching xenia pulse. Like, it's mesmerizing.
It's definitely one of those things, like if I ever have non-reefers over for, there's a party or something, having company over, that's one of the things they notice. Like, look at this thing, it moves on its own.
Yeah. What, is alive? I know.
Yeah.
Do you get that? Do you ever get that question from non-reefers? They're like, "Is that alive?" It's like every single thing in the tank. You're like,
I know. Yeah, that's it drives me a bit nuts, but it is what it is.
No.
I would say like another level would be, I don't know. I mean, I guess we should talk about maybe people's mindsets for how they want to keep tanks, because, like I've seen some amazing tanks that are run by people that are fairly hands off with it and don't tinker with it a lot. And it just kind of cruises. Like, they don't do a ton of water changes, but they have, their dosing dialed. They're not doing stuff like trace elements. They're not really paying a lot of attention to that, but they have a tank that just cruises and cruises for years, without major issues. But we know there can be issues.
Yeah. Well, there's also something to be said about keeping your hands out of the tank as well. Like, I know a lot of us more hardcore reefers, we love to tinker with our tank, right? The hands are in there. You're always tweaking. You're always doing stuff.
Yeah.
But, I sometimes wonder how much of a detriment is that? Is there oils from your skin, whatever else going into your tank, that may be stunting growth. You move stuff too often, annoys them, has to resettle in. Like, how much of a negative is it by doing that much, constant tweaking?
I mean, I always give my hands like a good like freshwater wash before I put them in. But I think if you're like working a trade or you're a mechanic or something and you're dealing with like oils or chemicals or stuff you would have on your hands, if you're a painter, I mean, I think then you have to be a lot more mindful and probably scrub more often. But I don't know. That's a tough one. I mean, would anybody ever do a study on like what our hands actually do in the tanks?
I don't know. It'd be interesting. The thing is, like, a lot of the stuff would be cool to know, but it's so hard to do it, right? You need like two identical tanks. One you throw your hands in every day, one you don't. Maybe I CP test it or whatever eventually. But a lot of these things, if you run carbon, maybe it negates it. But if you do water changes, maybe it's never an issue. But I feel like a lot of these things is like you never do water changes, and eventually something is going to build up and cause an issue.
Yeah, definitely. One of my systems that's at the local shop, I didn't do an ICP for probably 6 months, and the acros in that tank haven't been looking so good. It doesn't get the attention of my systems in my garage setup, but the ICP was pretty bad, and it wasn't surprising that the acros weren't doing well, because the potassium was super low. It was like 360, 350 or something like that, and the iodine was like 0.4. So half of kind of what it should be. So and just a lot of the trace was low. So I mean, it's kind of one of those things where like, sure, like you probably get away with like most types of corals and like most like hardy kinds of SPS, like bonsais and Monty caps and stuff. They're probably tolerant of less than perfect trace, but like if you want to go to that next level, which we'll get into, I think that's when you need to start paying a little more attention to those kind of things.
Well, so this is a good question. Some people never pay attention to trace. They don't dose it. It comes in on a water change, or if their supplement happens to have it, but they don't really dose it. And then you have the other side of the extreme reefers, where it's super hardcore. Look at that.
The logo just appeared. What the hell? It's
Deleted.
Not transparent. Okay.
And then you have another camp, they're like hardcore on the trace, hardcore down the rabbit hole. How, in your experience seeing tanks, what are like the biggest difference in a tank where they don't pay attention to trace versus one where they're like obsessed with dialing it in? Both can have nice tanks, but it's, I don't know. I feel like you're 80-90% similar without trace, but it's those extra little bits of color and stuff.
Yeah, I kind of say it's like the icing on the cake. It's that extra little bit of flair that you get, or the decorating of the cake. But yeah, I mean, I can say I've seen amazing systems with amazing color that don't do anything very specific when it comes to trace elements. They just, probably get them from their water changes and If you're doing something like ESV, that has trace in it. But yeah, there's also trace getting in from your fish food, which I think a lot of people aren't talking about. And a lot of fish food actually says what trace elements are in it. So that's something people should check out, because I've actually had very high manganese in my system on the last like 4 or 5 ICPs, which isn't bad. It's actually not a bad element to have above. But I noticed that the Vitalis pellets that I feed, manganese is one of the trace elements that's in it. So just a little thing, I just thought, okay, maybe I'll switch to different food that isn't loaded with manganese. Who knows how much is even in there? But yeah,
that's another thought that I have a lot is if you're not sticking to one brand and one system, you're mixing a bunch of different stuff. I know some of these bottles don't always tell you what's in it, and you could be, double or triple dosing certain trace elements, which eventually, could build up and cause issues eventually.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously KZ is one of those companies. And I think the reason KZ worked or was such a good system when it sort of first came out, and why some of those products are still popular, is because when that product line came out, there wasn't something like Triton or Moonshiners or, Fauna Marin doing these kind of individual elements. So the only way we were getting trace was from something like ESV, or maybe some of the trace you get from your calcium reactor, but there's not a ton of trace in there, as far as I understand. So, it's a tough one.
So if you weren't ICPing, would you rather have too much trace or not enough trace? Like, would you rather be under or over?
I think it really depends on the element. I would say if your iodine gets too high, your SPS can start to darken and brown out. I'm just trying to think of other ones that are over. Like, if your iron's over, it's not going to kill anything. It's just going to grow algae, and you might notice some of your yellow SPS start to kind of turn a little bit green.
Yeah.
So it's that one's not dangerous, but obviously to a point. Actually, Mike Paletta was just telling me that he raised his fluoride too much, and his blue corals started turning purple.
Interesting.
Yeah, so he didn't kill them by having the reading like 1.6 or 2 or something. It was beyond natural seawater.
Yeah.
But he said he just dialed it back slowly, and the blue corals turned blue again. So
that works. Yeah. I remember in my early days of reefing, I was using the Red Sea, the ABC or ABCD, whatever it is, and overdosing a bit. I remember certain colors, like like the reds and certain ones, like the Rainbow Monty back in the day. It'd be like red, green, yellow, orange, all these colors, and it turned almost all ruddy orange. Like there's certain colors that kind of took over from overdosing it.
Yeah, but you're dosing the whole system, so you can't really pin it on any particular one. Yeah, and I mean, that's another thing I guess you could kind of say for people that want to reef simply, is there are a few all-in-one trace solutions. Like there's Brightwell makes what is the Brightwell one called? Replenish, yeah. And then there's Captivates, Isolate MT. Yep. I think there's a few other ones out there. Like if you want to just keep your reefing really simple, but you want to add a little extra pop, like put in just like a drop or something, or or two, depending on your volume, like a few drops, a couple times a week or once a day, because, a little bit of trace is better than nothing.
Exactly. And with most of these too, it's always better to dose a bit less than they recommend and wait it out for a bit, make sure, there's no negative things. If you're overdosing trace, there's potential of, getting algae or cyano. There could be extra stuff that happen. So it's always better to start a little under and then just, slowly up it over time.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I'm pretty into the Fauna Marin system, and they have a lot of really good calculators, and like I really like their ICP. So actually their calculator is good for daily dose calculations too. So yeah,
that's good. So okay, 2 questions for you. Since you're talking about iodine, do you dose iodine into your tanks on its own, or is it just part of other stuff?
No, actually, that kind of brings me back to the KZ thing. So I still dose a little flatworm stop, and I've seen 2 ICPs on it, and it's quite high in iodine and potassium, and it has some manganese and other things in it too. So actually, my iodine was getting a little bit high, not scary range. So I cut my flatworm stop dose in half, and it dropped a little bit since the last ICP.
Okay.
So that kind of goes, like I was saying about the KZ stuff, is like people were having results, and I think people were saying like, oh, if you discontinue flatworm stop, your tank might not do as well.
Yep.
But that was back when people weren't dosing iodine as often, right? So like, or some of those trace elements. So maybe it was filling a role outside of the whole botanical kind of whatever wormwood concoction it is, you know, and that's the reason the tank didn't do as well when they stopped. It wasn't the wormwood concoction.
Yeah, that makes sense. Have you tried doing the wormwood? I made my own before to try it. Steeped it.
I feel like as long as it doesn't have any like arsenic or any kind of like toxins in it, like it's if it's either going to do like a little bit of something, or it may just end up being a carbon source at the end of the day. You know,
I
think that's the case for a lot of weird things that end up in the tank. You know?
Everything's carbon at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So super basic tank, you know, water change only. You know, next level up would be, okay, you're starting to look at dosing your tank. No, you could like either be manually, could be with a doser. I'd say that's your next level. I know, do you know less people do like fish only tanks, which I've never done, but a fish only system. And then, I don't know, I'd still put in zoas and soft, easy corals that require next to no effort if I did.
Yeah,
anyways,
I mean, I guess we're talking about reef tanks, but we shouldn't leave out, you know, just saltwater tanks in general, because some people are more into the fish, and that's totally cool. And that's a system like that is run a little bit differently, because if you're running like a fish only, you're probably running something like GFO, because who cares, right? You might as well just blast all the phosphates and nutrients out of there if you can.
Do you use GFO in reef tanks?
No.
I
hate GFO. But I also have to add phosphate to my tanks.
Yep. Okay. Fair.
So like I've rarely ever been in a situation where I have to reduce it, but I think GFO does some bad things. It's not meant. It works for some people, so I'm not gonna like say like stop using it. But there's a lot of people that I really respect their opinions, and they say no, don't touch that stuff.
So I've used it on and off for years if my phosphates get too high, and it absolutely does work to get it down. But it also does suck out trace. It does suck out other stuff as well.
Yeah.
So it definitely has a few other potential side effects with it. And interesting, I had a conversation with Lou last week, and he was talking about how now a lot of the stuff he's finding is actually more beneficial to have higher phosphates in the tank versus, before everyone's like 0.03. He's like, oh yeah, 0.1's great still. So I'm going to dig into that with him next week. But
yeah, he said 0.1 to 0.15 is kind of the sweet spot that they're onto now. So yeah, I would agree with that. I used to shoot for the 0.04 to 0.07. And then with my nitrates, maybe around 10. And now I'm kind of going more for phosphates, above 0.1, but probably below 0.15.
Yeah.
And then I would say, nitrates in a similar range, 10 to 12 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to try it a bit higher, because historically, if, I was over 0.1, I would run GFO or Rophos or something like that. But I think I might actually, let it be a little bit higher for a bit and just see if I notice any differences.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you'll notice probably millies really seem to like more phosphates. I've noticed that a lot. Yeah.
Love millies.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about different kinds of lighting based on, some simple reef styles and whatnot, because, I've actually seen some incredible tanks with those Chinese black box lights. So I think that's something that could intimidate people getting into the hobby, as you look at the price of the kind of industry standard Radions, and you go like, that's what it costs for one of those lights. That's that, and I need 3 of them.
Dude, when I bought my first 2 XR15s in a reef link, it was like $1,200. I was like, so much on a light. And then I don't know, I've never turned back since then. But the first time I bought them, it was like such a big hurdle for me. I'm like, this is crazy, it's so much. But then like all like the good reefers I knew had them, and like their tanks looked awesome. And I'm not gonna lie, my tank looked awesome with them over like the China ones. But I mean, they're both gonna grow corals, and that's the big thing.
Oh, where did the thing popped up again?
So so I mean, do you need super fancy lights? No, anything's gonna grow coral. There is advantage to having them, but no, you don't need them.
Yeah, well, and I wouldn't say anything's going to grow any coral, because some lights are not great for SPS.
Yeah, fair. Okay, actually, what do you think is like obviously like a CFL ball from Home Depot is not going to be the best for your
No.
corals, but like anything that's a reef light
Yeah.
with
Yeah, for
sufficient,
sure.
output, in theory, will, provide the par to grow coral. It might not look as good, but it will grow.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. I mean, I think some SPS will not do well without light that hits them from enough angles. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like I think acros really need like a good distribution of light. They can't have dark spots and hot spots and whatnot. I think that's,
That's fair.
that's why a lot of people with nanos kind of struggle with certain acros.
So an interesting one. So I upgraded my Radions to the narrow angle lens kit, which is basically like a G4 lens, like the hemisphere lenses on it. And then, but the G5-6 lenses are far better for coral because they do super wide, it wraps around it, where these are more, directional.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see how it plays out. But to me, they're similar with the G4s were, so I think it will still be good. Not as good, but a lot less light spill. I'm running my lights 20-25% lower because it's, punching that par down instead of spreading it out.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see kind of long term.
Yeah, and something else I would say, just speaking of like older gens of Radions, is there's a lot of like secondhand ones that come up on sale,
yeah.
and some people still, like, I've talked to quite a few people that say the Gen 4s are their favorites out of any of the gens that have come out. So, and they're fairly similar to the 3s as far as I remember. So like, you can get a used light for a few $100. That's would have been $1,000 new.
So speaking of, in the chat, Brian, hey Dev, what do you think is a good shimmer? Oh, skimmer. Oh, I think you mean skimmer. For a 120 SPS tank, more on the budget friendly skimmer.
I mean, a Jabao seems to be, or Jabo, however you want to say it.
Yeah.
That seems to be a pretty like common choice, even amongst some sort of, I would say, higher level reefers. I don't know about their skimmers too much though.
I believe it was Coral Box is the they use Jabo pumps. And they were pretty solid for the price. They're pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, skimmer is a pretty simple concept when you really think about it. I mean, you just have a chamber and a neck, and you create a bunch of fine bubbles, and like what really makes the high performing ones, other than size, what really makes them so much better? I think the needle wheels and the pumps are maybe a little better on the higher end ones.
Yeah.
And the cast acrylic versus like there's a type different ways that acrylic's done. I don't know if the bubbles like move up better in cast acrylic versus the molded ones or whatever.
The only big thing in my mind is one of them's safer for ozone and one isn't. Bubble magnets like the Curve 7, 9, like
Totally.
those are
great.
tried and true. Great for the price.
Yeah. The thing I find with the cheaper skimmers is like the little plastic parts and the things that hold them together are just like a lot easier to break.
That's fair.
Like, they're just not, Yeah, and I would say probably my favorite skimmer for the price are the Reef Octopus Elite series. Yeah,
I
definitely.
almost went for one of those.
Yeah.
I find one of the biggest things personally is the more expensive skimmers. Usually they're more solid, they're better built, and they're quieter. Some will produce more air, oxygen exchange in the tank.
Yeah, and then obviously there's like the DC versus AC, which, arguably I don't know how much more efficient the DC skimmers are these days.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're quieter.
Yeah.
But it depends. Woody's Gamer Tags, thanks for the super chat, buddy. I have basically the same skimmer question for 150 gallons. Fleece roller, overfeed the fish. I'm not budget oriented. I just want my last skimmer. I have it. So I have a Royal exclusive one that I got now, but that's mainly because I'm OCD, but make my tank as quiet as possible. And it is by far the quietest skimmer I've ever owned. There is another brand which I've been very curious to try. What the heck are they called? Give me one sec. But I was highly debating it, but they're too big for my tank.
Is it a new company or?
No, give me one sec. I have to quickly Google it. I'm mind blanking on the name. They're not Reef Octopus. Reef Octopus my Elite are good too.
Yeah, that would be my vote. Would be the Reef Octopus Elite, but also check used kind of Facebook groups or forums or whatever for like a Bubble King 200 or a Bubble King 180. And actually, a little trick with that is if the pump ever dies on you, they use the motor block from, I think it's a Sadra pump. that you can buy the same motor block for like 60 or 80 bucks as they charge like $300 or $400 for the replacement pump. So
good to know. Ultra Reef, that's what it was. I've heard that they're really quiet. They're supposed to be really good. Never used one. I was highly tempted to, but it was a little bit big for my tank, so I ended up not doing it. But I've heard really good things about them. They're supposed to be super quiet. If you're like OCD like me, trying to make your tank quiet as possible. Reef Octopus Elite, if you get the Space Saver design with the pump inside, I mean, that's probably easier for most people. I know what you're talking about.
It's just a little more work to clean, I guess, if you want to just clean the pump. You know, you got to take the whole skimmer apart. But and I also think I prefer the external if you have room, because it just gives you a bigger reaction chamber, so that pump's not taking up that portion of the reaction chamber too.
The other consideration too is usually the ones with the external pump, they're less susceptible to water change, or water height rather. So sometimes then if your sump level changes, it's not as big of a deal of it overflowing to the cup.
Yeah, that's true. There's a good question here about using soda ash alone versus bicarbonate as well. I would definitely do a blend. I've had some conversations recently, and I'm going to actually address this with Claude from Fontamara. Actually, I'm recording an episode tomorrow, so I'm going to ask him about this. I've been doing like a 50-50 soda ash to bicarb, and I'm starting to feel like I need to go more the bicarb direction. And I was trying to, obviously soda ash is going to give you a pH bump. Yeah. But I think like corals need that bicarbonate, and if you're just doing like a whole bunch of soda ash, you're kind of missing part of that whole ionic picture that should be happening. So I don't know. I'm gonna have a better answer for that tomorrow, hopefully. Okay. But there's a reason that the major companies that make bowling method type solutions, the reason that it's primarily bicarbonate is not just like, it's not an accident, So
that's fair. So it's ionic balance related. I wish there's some way to like test for like a reefer to be like, hey, this is how is my ionic balance in check, or is it out of check? I don't know how you do that, but
yeah, that'd be an interesting thing if they had. I mean, the Fauna total ICP gives you all these ratios and predictions and all these kinds of things, but I wonder if there is a way to kind of like actually kind of break down the ionic balance. I mean, I guess you would kind of know just based on the things that are positive ions versus negative ions, and compare that to the ocean.
True.
Yeah. Which is what we're always doing, right? We're always comparing the ocean water. So
just like a side random tangent. Do you think us elevating certain things can be better than the ocean, or do you think Mother Nature's still the best? Like, do you think we can push it past Mother Nature?
I mean, I think Mother Nature is still the best, and it's that way for a reason, obviously.
Yeah.
I do think it's possible that we can get faster growth in home aquariums, because we can push things like pH beyond natural seawater levels. I mean, I haven't heard from anyone out of any guest I've talked to that's doing trace elements if they've noticed any really major benefit from any particular trace being above natural seawater.
Yeah.
So, don't go and try that. But if anybody finds that they, had something elevated, I think Adam from Battle Corals told me he had really high nickel and things were looking really good. But, it could have been something else that was going on at the same time, and the corals were just tolerating the elevated nickel.
Could be.
Yeah.
So, days planification. If dosing calc plus soda ash, do you still need bicarb? I do not know the answer to that.
I would say you need the bicarbonate, because I think understanding alkalinity is really tricky, and alkalinity is not just like, it's a couple of different factors, right? It's not just like the amount of bicarb and whatever you put in. There's like so many like chemical things happening, and my understanding is that the bicarb is a big part of that equation. So it would be interesting to see if there was a test that came out for alkalinity that I wish I had some notes on this and I could actually give you some scientific explanations. But I think yeah, if there was a way to test for like 2 different types of alkalinity, like,
Well,
because yeah,
now you make me question it, because like I'm not dosing regular sodium. I'm dosing my Walter White style alkalinity supplement on top of the calcium reactor, on top of the calc. Does
yeah.
that mess up with the ionic balance on the?
Well, yeah, I don't know because it's in conjunction with these other things, but
Yeah.
like, isn't like calcium hydroxide like calc, like it's calcium hydroxide, and
Mm-hmm.
the hydroxide and the reaction it has with our tank water like creates alkalinity, right? It
Yeah.
creates an alkalinity reading, but it's not adding bicarbonate, which is what our tanks actually use.
True.
I think I'm saying this right. If there's
Well,
any sticklers out there that want to break down what I'm saying,
yeah.
go ahead. But
Okay, we're obviously more on the complex side of reefing now. I mean,
yeah, it's always going to happen.
it does so many rabbit holes. Like the simple, you do your water changes, you dose your basic 3-part, or you could just dose calc, or you could just do a calcium reactor, or Adam and I both got sucked into the rabbit holes of doing multiple methods, which adds a little bit of complication, but also has redundancy. Depends on
Yeah,
your perspective.
for sure.
Yeah. Devin, since we're on the episode topic, what do you think about counterflow design, degassing columns? After I share the research docs, I haven't actually fully read them all yet. I've only skimmed them. I'll get back to you on that one.
Bedtime
Actually,
reading.
Yep, it's the lack of free time. But actually, side note, I saw a really cool design of a tank a while ago, where there's no returns. It basically shoots the return underneath the tank and cycles it around. So it's almost like a power headless design, which is pretty cool. And someone on the stream sent me, they have one of those tanks now, a bigger one, and they sent me as they just set it up. And I'm really curious to see it long term, because having no power heads in a tank would be pretty cool.
Yeah, that would be super cool. I wonder too if there would be a way to have like an inline heater that's like, do they have heaters that are hooked up to plumbing?
They do, but there was still an overflow column, so you could hide it in there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, they had dual Vectra M1s, I think, basically as their return pumps, but it was also their power heads as the cycle through the tank. It was a cool design. I know. So, okay. So we're going, easy tank, go to the more complicated tank. For the average reefer, most people fall into a tank with a sump and the 3-part dosing. That's probably the most common. Calc's making a bit of a comeback as a supplement. How do you feel the different dosing systems? So if we take a look at, a 1-part, like a calcium formate, like an alpha reef, or like calquaster only, or maybe calcium reactor only, versus, the 3 parts where you're tweaking it or different methods. Do you think there's a big difference for the average reefer of simplicity, the different methods?
Yeah. I mean, the simplest is going to, obviously just doing water changes is the simplest, but we kind of talked about how that's only going to work until a certain point. But then the 1-part solutions do seem to make sense for smaller tanks with not a huge coral volume. But some people use them on bigger systems. I know they sell, bigger sizes of the Alpha Reef now. So, but then, I guess, the next thing would be buying a doser, and there's some inexpensive dosers that work great, and then doing like a balling system or a 2-part kind of system like ESV or one of those kind of things. I don't think that's particularly complicated.
No. So most systems, you dose everything in equal parts. So bare bone basics, calc, you could do with 1 dosing pump. Alpha Reef for pull-up subs 1, or there's a few other brands that make it. Same thing, you could have 1 dosing pump for it. So calc or 1 part. If you look at something like ESV, technically it's 2-part. And then majority of them are 3-part, where you have your calcium, your alk, and your mag.
Yeah.
So
and some balling systems have the sodium, like the non-sodium chloride sodium, the mineral salts, which is another sort of component that I think just sounds complicated, and I don't think is entirely necessary, but
that's fair.
Yeah, and then calcium reactors. I mean, I've always loved calcium reactors, but obviously the negative side is the lowering of pH.
Yeah.
And also just calcium reactor, like dosing lines are just really prone to getting clogged and blocked. And like sometimes you can't tell that stream is like a little weaker one day, and it'll just start to kind of like, your alkalinity will just drop a little bit, but you don't super notice it.
Yeah.
So, that's
fair.
kind of, I guess, a con to calcium reactors. But at the same time, I mean, what comes out of a calcium reactor, once you have it dialed in, and I say at the right pH, is going to be like a balanced, alkalinity calcium.
Which is nice, right?
Yeah.
Other than depressing your pH, like, they're pretty awesome.
Yeah, sure.
Depending on your media, it could add phosphates to your tank, which, like in your case, you're adding phosphates, so it's kind of an advantage, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and then I guess the next thing, we did kind of mention calc, but calc actually has the ability to precipitate your phosphates onto your surfaces. So, if you're running calc and a calcium reactor, they might be kind of going against each other as far as that phosphate reading is going.
True.
Yeah. But one thing that should be said about calc is that there are risks with going off of calc once you've started, or if you say have like a power outage and your pH, or say you have a party and your tank's in like the main living space and your pH gets some huge major drop, all of those things that have precipitated onto your surfaces via the calc could potentially leach out into your system and actually crash your tank. Yeah.
Interesting.
And actually, I'll have to talk to him about this, but a well-known Canadian reefer that we both know had some issues like this recently, and I asked him if he'd had a pH drop, and he was like, yeah, this happened last week or whatever, and he went and did an ICP, and some levels were just like off the charts high, like crazy high.
So it's the low pH that causes it to basically leach back into the water? Or
yeah, I think because of the sort of hyperreactiveness of calcium hydroxide, it just basically like, it kind of just like binds to things. It's like kind of like this like chemical crack for our tanks. Actually Mike Paletta just told me that it precipitates fluoride very easily. That's like one of the elements that seems to get bound up in it quite quickly.
Interesting.
Yeah. So if you were doing calc and say you went on vacation and you changed your dosing method while you're gone because you're not around to say make up this big batch of calc, you could potentially like, I'm going to just like dose more of my 2-part in the meantime. And then say your pH doesn't get as high. I mean, I don't know what the danger point is where things come out of that precipitate, but it's definitely something to consider if someone's thinking about adding or implementing calc into their system.
So
there are some dangers.
Since you're having Fauna on tomorrow, ask him about that, because I know Fauna doesn't make a calc, and I'm pretty sure that they're not really a fan of calc.
Yeah, no, it's on my list. That's 100%
ask them why. Like, what in their opinion, what is the downfalls? Because I'm really curious to hear about that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like I said, I mean, there's a reason they have their bowling method, and it is the way it is. It's mostly bicarbonate in that alk solution. Yeah.
So do you, for dosing a system, before I go into that, in the comments someone was saying simple versus complex often depends on the budget for most of us. It can, for sure, that can definitely play into it. I know a lot of the gear stuff is just kind of like being a gear junkie and wanting to play with different things. Where do you need it? No, is a nice to have, yes, as with most things. But I've always been bad of mixing random brands and random stuff together. Do you think there's any bigger issues or detriments to mixing a bazillion different brands, or do you think there's a big advantage to sticking to a single brand or system?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like in Europe, like a lot of reefers stick to a brand and a regimen, and they kind of, stay within those guidelines and use their system. And it makes it harder when you come to, someone like Lou Eckes or Claude at Fauna, and you say, I have this question, and they say, oh, what are you using? And they're like, oh, I use the Brightwell this and the Fauna Marin this. And I mean, it's tough because, we look at all these different companies, and there isn't one company that does everything the best, that has the best, like, amino, the best, like, so we mix and match, but it does make it a little bit harder when we're trying to, get customer support or something like that. But I mean, yeah, I use products from quite a few different brands.
Yeah. I thought about trying to do like one brand per tank and to see what happens, if there's any like noticeable difference, but it's so anecdotal, it's hard to actually judge that for sure.
Yeah, I can't imagine making up like different batches of salt for different water changes too.
No, I wouldn't go that far, but just for the dosing and the additives. Like I was using Replenish and a bunch of their stuff on the water box, which is almost out, so I just ordered some. I was talking to Lou the other day, so I don't know, he probably inspired me, but I ordered their A and K. I'm going to try putting that on the doser on the water box and, just see if there's any difference, like a supposedly complete 2 dosers, instead of my 4 now. So trying to simplify a little bit and see what happens.
Yeah, actually, so I guess something we could talk about with simple reefing versus complex is aquarium controllers, and the most simple aquarium controller being a person.
Yeah.
And then going all the way to, I mean, I would say the most complex controllers are probably the GHL.
To program, yes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But what have you used for aquarium controllers personally for yourself?
I've used Apex. And me, obviously.
Yeah.
I think I used to use like Reefkeeper Lite back in the day that would just do, I think it used to do like temperature and pH or something and control a couple outlets. And it wasn't like hooked up to the internet or anything like that. Yeah. And I do really believe in a really basic aquarium controller just to control your heater. If you're using the heater's temperature, thermostat to go turn on and off, I think that's kind of like a fundamental thing, even for like a basic system.
Yeah.
But
yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah. I've been on the fence on that one. My Nano, there's no controller right now. There's nothing. And, even my other tanks with controllers, I still have a heater controller plugged in. The Nano, nothing. It's like literally just good old Eheim on there and a light and a power head and soon to be dosing pump, and that's it. But I've been on the fence of adding one. I'm really trying hard to be like super basic tank. Like, don't overcomplicate it like I normally do.
Yeah,
we'll
that's
I'm on the fence.
For sure. Yeah, and and I think another like thing that some people do that, cool, they can do that if they want, but they start putting complex equipment on a system when the system's very early on. Like you put a Trident on a tank that's doesn't even have any coral in it yet. It's like, oh, surprise, surprise, the level's basically the same every day. It's not going to change that much. So like, a Trident is, or like an automated tester, that's a down the road thing.
You know what's funny? Since I have like auto testers in my tanks with the Nano, I'm like, it's gonna be the hardest part dialing my all for reef on. I'm like, I'm gonna have to do elk tests and make sure it's stable. Like manually bust out the Hana that I haven't used in ages.
Yeah.
So
well, and that's part of like this, like a simple way is to just keep a log, use your kits and keep a log and figure out your rate of depletion of things. And, I mean, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. John, first controller to have would be heating in an ATO. Yeah, I would agree. An automatic top off. You can absolutely have a tank without one, but you are the ATO. You've got to add water every day or two to the tank for evaporation. I lasted about a month of like taking a deli cup and adding my RO water to it every day. And then eventually I broke down and bought an ATO.
It's easy to get lazy on that for sure.
It is.
Like my house plants not getting watered very often.
Should get them an ATO, man. Just put a dosing pump on them.
Yeah. Totally.
So, if you were not going to have a controller, a heater controller is a wise investment. Even if you go for a cheaper one like the Inkbird, I mean, they're what? They're $40 off Amazon, probably. They're cheap.
Yeah. Totally.
Like, if nothing else, that is a good idea to have.
Yeah.
Because if something happens in your tank, heaters are the most common reasons for a tank to fail. So that is a wise idea if you don't need an aquarium controller. That will cover, your biggest things. Automatic top off, again, that adds stability. It saves you a bunch of effort. That's probably worth it. If you want to keep a tank super, super simple, basic.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, another thing I would say for like people starting a simple Nano is if you know another reefer that has, say, like a fairly big system, or not even that big. Let's say it's a minimum of like 60 gallons, and you're starting a tank. Like get like 5 or 10 gallons of water from their water change and use that to start your tank, and then a few chunks of their rock if you can. That could save you like 3 months of trying to establish a tank, I think.
I need to steal rock from you one day. I feel like you will have like this pristine
I don't know.
I don't know. I've always thought
there.
about it. It's like one of those things, but it's like you just from all your like, importing, I know you've bought ocean rock, and I'm just like, I wonder if there is a big difference between, my old school rock versus, your ocean, all your other rock. Like if there's a big difference in like bacteria in your tank. And
Yeah, I mean, we all have a little bit of a different recipe, and we probably have some good guys and some bad guys. So, it's always hard to say.
Yeah.
And it's always like shifting slightly, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's probably one of those things where like you should exchange rock with someone that has a good tank every once in a while. Just maybe they have a few strains that are good that you don't have, and vice versa, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Even I remember like my first tank, I bought rock off some like random guy that had it in a big, this big tank sitting on his floor with a lionfish in it, just like keep it all cycled. And, it made my first tank relatively easy because it was aged rock that was full of bacteria and, it worked.
Yeah.
But that's, versus dry rock where you have a lot more of the uglies, you have a lot more other hurdles to go through if you're starting a tank.
Yeah. And I think the dry rock is one of the things that's made the hobby a little bit more difficult for new hobbyists. And
I agree.
sure, we have more kind of bacteria cycling products, and some people seem to have success with them. But I mean, I still have so much live rock that I don't think I'll ever have to set up a tank with dry rock.
That's fair. Even if you do, I would still throw a couple of live rocks in there to help kind of inoculate the other rock just to kickstart it.
Totally. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I like the idea of a tank that is set up that has nothing other than the coral that's put in it and the fish. Like there's no, there's no live rock, and it's you controlling it completely from the beginning, or at least attempting to. It'd be an interesting experiment.
Yeah. I thought about this idea for a while in a nano, but 3D printing my rock or aquascape and just letting the coral encrust over it and kind of turn it into the aquascape over time. And I mean, the bacteria, you do not need to cycle a tank for the coral per se. Certain acros, like they'll thrive, once the tank's established, it's got stability, it's got certain bacteria, it seems to thrive more. But you could put coral into a brand new tank and it will survive. You might not fully thrive, but it'll survive. So you don't necessarily need this aged live rock. But it does help.
Yeah, I think it helps.
Yeah, a lot of the cycling is more for the fish. But again, a lot of like SPS, they don't tend to thrive until the tank's kind of mature and aged, which likely means bacteria is settled and happy.
Yeah, you need to establish biofilms, and that's even just on the surfaces of the glass too. That's why, like, sometimes if you put like a foreign object in the tank, like a fish trap is in there for a week or something like that, it grows algae on it because it doesn't have the biofilms that the rest of your tank has. So, yeah. And that's one of the things I think people need to consider if they're going more into a complex side here. If they're treating a system with antibiotics for some particular reason, which I'm trying to push against this and find a way to treat tanks with probiotic methods instead.
Yeah.
But if you're treating with antibiotics, you're messing up all your biofilms.
You are. If you're going to do it, I feel you're better off doing it as a dip outside of the tank, so you're not nuking all the bacteria in your tank.
Yeah,
because it's going to get rid of the good and the bad and almost reset things. Then whatever one's more prevalent is going to take over. Where if you dip your coral having an issue outside of the tank, at least you're not killing all the bacteria within your system.
Yeah, totally. Or if you have a hospital tank, something like that you can actually keep the corals in for a week and do those treatments and then move them on. Of course, there's still possibility of bacteria or antibiotic resistance. There's that whole debate. So, yeah, I kind of tiptoe around this subject.
That's fair.
But, yeah.
Okay, Peter T. Ethical Aquatics had lost some fish with an inkbird malfunctioning. So if you're going to use a heater controller, I always suggest let the heater controller turn your heater on and off and put the stock heater controller on the thermostat slightly higher.
Yeah.
So what happens when a heater dies is usually the little thermostat, the little piece of metal that flips inside of it, gets stuck on and it stays on. If you're using your heater controller, turn it off and on, that little metal tab never moves and it's not going to get worn out. And so if your heater controller ever fails, then that's kind of your backup, is just the built-in heater.
Totally.
So that's my advice on that one.
I'm also a big fan of, like, if you figure out what the wattage of heaters you need for a system is, use two heaters and split that wattage between the two of them. Because then if one has an issue, at least if one stays on too much, it's not going to have the ability to heat the water way too much. And then if one doesn't come on, then at least you got the other one working for you. So
yeah, keep your tank full. 100% agree. And most of the heater controllers have 2 plugs on it for that reason. So use both, and then you're pretty much set.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Although then you're relying on one heater controller. But yeah.
I mean, if you're hardcore, I guess you could have 2. But I think one with two separate heater, 2 half wattage separate heaters with their own thermostat set slightly higher than the heater controller, you should be safe.
Yeah. Oh, I got something we can talk about with simple/budget reefing compared to higher end. We didn't really talk about salt. So there's a lot of people that are, I would consider high-level master type SPS people that are all about the reef crystals right now.
I agree. Tried and true. I mean, it's affordable, which is a big thing too, especially if you're doing massive water changes. Instant ocean versus reef crystals. Any big difference in your mind on the two?
Well, I've heard that the alkalinity is quite high on the reef crystals, and I think when I used to use Instant Ocean, I used it for years. I used to test it before I did a water change. I just test calcium and alkalinity just to make sure they're, not wildly weird. And the calcium was always really low on it, so I would just do the calculation and add some calcium chloride to it.
Okay,
so and then do my water change.
Interestingly enough, with Ryan, we did that big salt test a while back, and on his, the alkalinity in Instant Ocean was 11, and on reef crystals it was 9.4. So it was actually higher on Instant Ocean, which I thought was kind of crazy.
But that's the weird thing with Instant Ocean is it's changed so much. I feel like the recipe has changed over the years. It shifts in a certain direction, and then and then you go from that because what is a bucket of what's a bucket of Instant Ocean cost in Canadian? It's probably $50-$60, $50.
Yeah, I feel like it's 60 something.
Yeah, so it's probably $40 US, something like that. Yeah, and then you get into some salt that's like the Fauna Marin salt is I think Fauna Marin and Tropic Marin retail 200-gallon buckets or boxes, I think, are around 150, 160 Canadian.
Yeah.
So, you're looking at more than double, almost 3 times.
Yep.
So, yeah.
That's the hard bit.
Yeah, there's some good breakdowns of where people have ICP'd different salts on, I think, Reef to Reef. Maybe we can add that to the show notes or something like that. Oh, you got it. There's Mind Reader over here. Look at this.
Yeah, we did a live stream on it with Ryan a while ago.
Oh, okay.
This is my Google spreadsheet I made on it. Of all the different salts. It's probably Ryan's post you're looking at, and we did a live stream about it a while ago because he was super hardcore, got every salt that he could, get his hands on, and ICP'd them all, which is kind of a cool test.
Can you give me some major kind of highlights of that?
We'll go back to this one. One of the biggest kind of conclusions we went to, a lot of the certain ones were just cleaner salts. Mm-hmm. I know looking at Instant Ocean reef crystals, I know reef crystals always made my bins dirty. Instant Ocean didn't seem to. If you're looking at stuff like Fauna or Nios, Tropic Marin, a lot of the fancier salts, the ESV, they're super clean, mixed up really quick. It's a lot of little stuff like that. Some of them are a little more sporadic in the trace. I'll put the link here.
Yeah, can you send me the doc too? I can just get it in front of me here.
Yep.
Can you send it in the chat?
Again. There you go.
All right.
Nope. Yeah.
Yep. I don't know how this works. This is complex. Okay.
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay, I got it. Nice.
NSP Reef. Alka Forest salt is my go-to. Yeah, Alka Forest is really good. I've used that one. That's been solid. IO, every box is different. I think the alkalinity in IO jumps around a lot.
Yeah. Totally. And I think it comes down to that thing I was talking about with alkalinity and how, we don't measure, alkalinity is a more complex thing than we measure for. So who knows? Who freaking knows? I'm going to take a quick scan of this just while we're doing this, but I have not seen it yet. So Ryan, the Chummingham's Reef. Ryan, right? Is that who you're talking about? Okay.
No, different Ryan.
Different Ryan. Okay.
Yeah, one of the BRS moderators, Facebook group moderators, Ryan Thompson.
That makes sense. I don't see Chummingham having time to do that.
Yeah.
Also, that's quite a bit of money in.
Yes, it was.
ICP tests.
Yes, it was. But it was super cool that he did it.
Yeah, as speaking on behalf of the reef community, we thank you for your efforts,
Yep.
Ryan. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, heard that the bins get dirty from the anti-caking agent to use since they deliver bulk in some places. Yeah, I've heard similar things like the clays or whatever they use to prevent it from clumping is part of what makes your mixing bin dirty. I prefer to clean my mixing bins less, so I prefer stuff that mixes cleaner, from a maintenance perspective. But again, I also a lot of the time I just go for whatever is on sale and cheap.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I noticed when I was using Brightwell, that really made my bins dirty. And
What
because that's supposed to be a synthetic salt, so it's
it
not a
is.
mined salt. So you would think if they are putting all of those individual elements in, like there wouldn't be any byproducts like that. But if it's the
Yeah.
decaking agents, then,
The weird thing that I found with Brightwell, if my water was warm, it mixed clean. If my water was cold, then it mixed dirty. So the water temperature seemed to play into that. That I noticed that with Brightwell because I used it for a good year. I don't know if that's the same with the other ones, but yeah, it made a big difference based on the water temperature, which was interesting. What is going on, guys? Don't forget to hit that thumbs up. Always appreciated. So yeah,
there's some crazy stuff here. I'll stop looking at this in a second, but I'm just curious.
I have it open too.
It's crazy how some of them have, no vanadium. And yeah.
The biggest
weird.
the biggest thing I'd say to most people, whatever you keep your elk at, pick a salt that matches that. Here's a spreadsheet for everyone who wants to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that, but also, like I was doing with the Red Sea, is I used the blue bucket and I added some of the black bucket. So it was like the 5-to-1 ratio. But you could also, if you're using a salt that has a little lower alkalinity, you can always add just a little bit of sodium bicarb, or if you want to raise the pH a little bit on your water, you could always use sodium carbonate. Yeah.
Like if you have, a 200-gallon tank and you do a 10-20% water change, it probably isn't going to matter that much what the alkalinity is, assuming you're dosing other methods anyways. If you're relying on your water changes to replace all your elements, then you might want a little bit elevated. But I always kind of say, pick an elk that matches your tank. So if you do have some panic, you could do a big water change. It's not going to swing your parameters and shock stuff. And that's one of the biggest considerations.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, that's a good point with, if you're doing a small nano and just relying on water changes, maybe a slightly elevated alkalinity is going to be good for that. Because then you won't have that depletion over time.
Yeah.
Because if you're just adding an salt that alkalinity matches your tank, then inevitably it is going to get lower and lower and lower.
Yeah, exactly. But again, you got a big issue in your tank, you do a massive water change, you're not going to have a big elk swing, everything's happy. Now, if you're dosing anyways, then I don't think it really matters. If you're only doing like little water changes, it doesn't really matter what the elk and the salt is. It's not going to affect things much, especially on a larger system.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yep.
Totally.
Ricky, are you sure about that? I legit only eat my fish room. I think you mean heat for 3 months of the year. Don't eat the fish room.
You know where we didn't go with this whole complex versus simple is talking about corals.
Very true.
That is a really big component of it, because there's a lot of, I'd say, intimidation in the prices of a lot of the sort of nicest quote unquote corals, but there's so many awesome corals that don't cost that much that you can make an amazing tank with.
Very true.
So, that's a thing to kind of consider if you want to just have a tank that's full of frags that you buy that are $20 to $40, your tank could look amazing.
Well, here's another consideration. Either budget or time or complexity you want to deal with, do a softy tank. Tons of cool softies out there, do a Zoa tank. Like there's tons of really easy corals that are super forgiving and you don't really even have to worry about dosing for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and another thing too is like when a high-end sort of name coral comes out, the price is always really high at the beginning. But think about something like Pink Cadillac. Like, if you wait a couple years and if that coral is a fast grower, it's going to get propagated like crazy and the price is going to drop. Because Pink Cadillac was $400 and now it's like people like I've threw out a colony once, like I
Yeah.
literally had to throw one out because they had 5 colonies like this big, and I'm like, these are actually costing me money to keep them. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of those things too, is like if you wait, and if that coral is a coral that gets propagated a lot in the hobby, that's another testament to the fact that it's going to be an easy piece for you to grow too.
And it'll be hardier too, right? If
Yeah,
you have some
exactly.
fancy, delicate coral, it costs you hundreds of dollars, and then it's finicky, and you're not paying attention and it dies, then that sucks. Or if you have some, $30 frag that grows like a weed, and you probably can't kill it if you try. So I mean, there's
Totally.
make your life easier by getting some of these hardy established corals.
Totally.
Yep.
Yeah, and then there's the other flip side, is the super high-end designer complex coral thing, and some of us love those corals, and some people love to be the first person to have it.
Yep.
And that's fun too. You can do that.
I know.
Allowed.
Like, I know when I originally got my little nub of goldenrod, it was super overly priced, and now it grows pretty dang quick, and now it's relatively inexpensive. Over time, by the time you have a lot of courses, cheap. But but the other thing is too, like something like a green slimer, it is super bright. From 20 feet away, it's glows, looks awesome in the tank. Where sometimes some of the high-end corals look amazing when you're close, but from a distance, it's same.
Totally.
So it all depends on like your level of obsession and rabbit holes in the reef.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, that's a thing to consider if you want to reef simple or complex, is your choice of livestock. And I guess fish too would be another thing. There's just so many good, like, classic easy fish that you can get that aren't that expensive.
Clownfish, hardy, easy, everyone loves them. Good old chromis, like there's tons of fish that they're bright, they're colorful, they're super hardy, not an issue. So if you want a super basic tank, again, picking corals, soft corals, zoas, mushrooms, rorquardia, rock flowers, anything that's soft and doesn't have a skeleton is going to be very forgiving, and you're not really going to be overly worried about dosing in the tank. Water changers are likely all you're going to need. It's like those cool, big Japanese toadstool with the bright green polyps. Like, there's tons of cool stuff if you want a basic low stress tank. Like, if I ever do one, in my work office, I'd just do easy corals where I don't have to worry about dosing. Just give it a water change once in a while, and things will be happy.
Yeah, or even do water changes out of your other tanks.
Yeah,
that's another thing too, right?
Same on salt too.
Totally.
I should do that on my nano, actually.
Yeah, let's see. What else? I would say, can we talk about some things that are complex or overrated or things like that?
What would you say is some of the more, you don't need it, nice to have, or it complicates things? Like, do you feel like there's anything on your system that you probably don't need, or some rabbit hole that you do that you probably don't need, but you just do it because?
Well, CO2 scrubbers, I think, are probably something on that list, because I did use them for a while. I think this was before I started using calc. They do work, but the problem is that they work like really well for a few days, and then they just kind of work like all right, and then you got to change the media, and it's kind of this like subscription model. And at the end of the day, there's better ways to get your pH up. But I mean, it does its job. It's just it's just not a great it's not a great way to do it.
Yeah, I have a lot of mixed feelings on the subscription model thing, where you have to always be replenishing something. And again, I don't have either CO2 scrubber up right now. I still have a bucket of media in my shed sitting there, which I'll probably use at some point. But
I bought the bucket right when I pulled mine off, actually, which I was like, damn it, I just bought this bucket of it.
Yeah. Well, I replaced my skimmers, and I was like, my old scrubbers don't fit in anymore, so I just haven't bothered putting them back on yet. But again, that's a good one. Filter rollers is kind of a subscription model, but they seem to last a long time now, and I'm okay with it because I don't want to deal with socks. I would either do nothing or a filter roller. I wouldn't do socks.
Yeah,
again. It's too much work.
Yeah, if you compare your time, dealing with the socks versus the filter roller, I don't have any filter rollers, but I can see how they would be nice for sure. But not necessary, but definitely good for some tanks.
Yep. Now, if you're adding a skimmer and a filter roller to your tank, that's another consideration, because having a filter roller takes away a lot of the work that the skimmer needs to do, because you're removing all that stuff before it breaks down. So there's less stuff for your skimmer to skim up. So it's very easy to, add one, and then, you might be oversizing your skimmer and it has a hard time doing its job.
That's true. And that's another thing that goes along the lines of what I was saying with people putting a Trident on their brand new tank, or, an automated tester, is like, you don't need to have your skimmer on and your filter roller running on a brand new cycling system. Those are things I don't know. I don't think you even need to turn your skimmer on in a new system until like a couple months in at least.
It's true.
Yeah.
Would you put a skimmer on a nano or a small tank?
No, I don't think I would. No, because I mean, especially like a small water change, like a small amount of water to do a water change goes a lot farther on a small tank. So, like you're basically pulling out so much stuff anyways that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that there's the oxygen exchange happening, and maybe skimmers should always be on and just run super dry. Like, just run the level really low, and then it's kind of just sitting there on standby. I mean, I think that's a good way to look at it too, if you want to just leave the skimmer on. But but you know how it is. Like with new tanks with very little fish load, like those skimmers like barely do anything, and people think their skimmer's not even working. It's like, because there's nothing for it to react with.
It's true. I find most of the small skimmers don't work all that well either, so I feel like it's kind of pointless. Yeah. And they're usually noisy. They're not as quiet. So
totally
on a small tank, just do a periodic water change and save the money on the skimmer.
Yeah, I don't think these small sort of nano tanks need skimmers. Totally. Yeah, they've always been annoying and loud. Remember those like Red Sea Berlin kind of the Red Sea overflow ones? Yeah. Those black like Remoras, like those things are like so noisy.
Oh, they were bad. The Tunesy one wasn't bad. Tunesy has a small, I don't know if it's a comb line or something. It's like a little tower one. That one wasn't bad. It was pretty darn quiet.
Yeah.
I remember
I just think that the amount of reaction chamber is just not a lot to really like do that much.
Yeah.
In those small ones. Yeah.
I remember back in my early days, there was an innovative marine, I think it's called the Ghost Skimmer, but the thing was so noisy. I put on a timer. I'd only run it at night when I was in bed because I didn't want to hear it. It was just too the sound. That's drove me nuts.
Noisy ghost.
Yep.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, filter pads. See, even filter pads, I don't know if I'd do anymore. Like, if I want to polish the water, maybe a little polyfill or, like, a little bit of fleece material. Otherwise, I'll just let it run without if I didn't need to polish it. I've always needed a filter roller.
Yeah. Yeah. What else here? What else can we say that is complex versus simple as far as how to reef?
Controllers, can go either way.
Yeah.
ATO, I would always want to have. Heater controller is a good idea for sure. It's wise to do it. I mean, I don't have one on my tank yet, even though I have one sitting in my shed. Maybe one day I'll add it. But it is wise. As for an aquarium controller, you don't need one, but they're nice to have.
Yeah, I mean, something like an automated tester, you have to keep in mind there's going to be maintenance of that piece of equipment. So even though it's saving you time doing your daily testing, it does have some work and complexity involved in it too.
Would you rather have an aquarium controller or an auto tester?
Oh, that's actually a good question. Because if you think about it, there's a lot of pieces of equipment like Radions have their own controllers built in. Eco, like the Vortex do. A lot of equipment has its own controller. Yeah, I probably would take the automated tester over a controller only because automated testing has saved me probably some, I wouldn't say crashes, but it saved me from some issues where, like my calcium reactor line was blocked and my alkalinity was dropping, and I was able to sort of find that problem, within 6 hours, as opposed to, who knows when the next time I would have tested manually was.
Yeah.
And then my alkalinity, my alkalinity could drop to like overnight, could drop from like 8.3 to like, 5.3, with no dosing, probably. Yeah. It's wild.
Oh, crazy. Yeah. I've made a few dosing mistakes in my day. The worst one, actually, I kicked on, this is the worst idea ever. Don't mess with your tank on an airplane. I kicked on I was like, oh, my alkalinity is low. Let me manually kick it on. And I think I turned it off, but I think I lost reception or my signal was too bad. It didn't turn off and just kept dosing.
Oh.
Yeah, so don't mess with your tank on an airplane if you have bad signal.
Yeah, not a good time.
Yeah.
Not a good time.
I think I'd probably go for an auto tester too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Going back to the basics, obviously you want to make sure your tank's a reasonable temperature. I find a lot of people don't necessarily test salinity. I know in my early days, I've had issues in the past where if my salinity was either too high or too low, it will mess with all your other parameters. So you should test your salinity periodically because, again, if it's off, everything else is going to be off. It's going to mess with the whole ratio of everything. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And we talked about this on the disaster prevention episode, but I'm like, I kind of hate on salinity probes. I mean, I think they're good as just like a little thing to check every once in a while, but they're definitely not what you should be really testing your salinity with. I think
you should test once in a while.
Refractometer that's calibrated with the proper solution or a good quality hydrometer.
The yield faithful refractometers.
Yeah. Or wait, is it hydrometer? I'm talking about the floaty things. What's
That's
the floaty thing? Yeah, it's hydrometer. Yeah. Yeah, because gravity doesn't lie. Gravity is consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. That's fair. The only thing is you need like
things.
a lot of water to do it.
Yeah. I haven't used those in a while. I just use my refractometer. And actually something I do every once in a while is whenever I get corals from someone else, I test their salinity and then I test it to my refractometer I test it to my water and I just make sure that they're kind of the same and it is what I was expecting it would be.
That's fair.
And then, sometimes I'll get water from someone and it's like 1.03. It's kind of high and they had no idea because it just drifted.
Yep. Well, that's the thing, right? If you're doing something like calc or other stuff, eventually, even like 2-part dosing, your salinity can shift over time if you never test it, which can mess with everything else in the tank.
Yeah, especially if you're dosing a lot of 2-part because you're putting, basically more sodium into the tank.
Yeah. You're adding salt.
Yeah.
As well as RDI that's in it. So it does mess with stuff over the time. And again, you do regular water changes, you're probably fine. If you don't, the stuff's going to drift more and more as time goes on.
Yeah. What about sort of the difference between people that have never done an ICP or someone that does it once a year or someone that does it monthly? I think that's something we could discuss. I think that everyone, even if you want to reef real simple, I still think it's a good idea to do an ICP once a year. Maybe not on a little nano, but there are certain things that can build up. Certain metals, like things like tin, can be a real problem. And I think it's just like we can learn from that. So I do encourage people to do an ICP on occasion.
On a small tank, I wouldn't bother. I would just say totally. Just do some water changes or do some big ones once in a while and you kind of reset things. So then it's kind of irrelevant. On a large system, if you do lots of water changes, you're probably fine. If you're a slacker in water changes, then ICP is a good idea. Yeah.
I mean, one thing I would say is doing an ICP that does a reverse osmosis sample is it can tell you if you've got silicates in your RO water, and then that can sort of show you if you need to get better DI resin or better source water in the first place.
That's fair.
Because you could be suffering from like algae problems like diatoms or from your silicates. So, I mean, I'm never going to say anybody like has to do an ICP. I just think it's it doesn't cost that much money, and it'll give you like some good indications.
The other thing I would say too is if you're diving into trace elements and you're dosing them, it's good to do it periodically to make sure you're not overdosing or you're not completely underdosing, because in general you don't really want to dose stuff you can't test for, and a lot of the traces, the only way to properly test it is with an ICP. So you want to make sure you're not dosing too much or overdoing anything, and that's a good kind of check for it.
Totally. Yeah, and I guess it's tough because if you really do want to dial in trace elements, you kind of have to do it every 4 to 6 weeks or so, because otherwise, like it's hard to kind of really get steady data from that. If you're just doing an ICP maybe every 3 months and then you make the trace element adjustments, it's 100% going to be the things that were 0 are going to be 0 by the time you do the next one, for sure.
Fair points.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have it on a doser, just doing periodic ones, just be like, hey, do I dose more, dose less? But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. John Wright at Frag, what's your opinion on adding corals to a newly cycled tank?
I like adding corals to a newly cycled tank. I think that it really kind of gets the biology of the tank kind of going. And I know Jake Adams was big on this too. And you know, even if you can just, I don't know, if you know another reefer that's got like some stuff they don't care about that much, that, you know, you can just kind of put it in there and get the system kind of kickstarted and then maybe get rid of it later or whatever. Like, yeah, I'm big on that. As long as, you know, the nitrification cycle is kind of in order. Yeah, I'm all for that.
That's fair. Another big consideration too is the corals are also bringing in bacteria diversity to the tank. And so that's going to help cycle your tank as well.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
I agree. I think it's good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not talked about as much. You know, you think about corals having bacteria on their surfaces that affect the coral itself, but I'm sure a lot of that bacteria, you know, has a lot to do with the tank as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. Question, I've been dosing soda ash. My pH is getting too high. I want to switch to bicarbonate, but I need to dose 2 times as much. For calcium, do I need to match bicarb dosing? I've never had a straight up equal dose of the two in my tanks. I've always had to dose more alk than calcium. So as long as you're testing both, just tweak your dosing to keep it stable at the end of the day. But again, you could blend the two, like carb and bicarb together, and do a bit of a blend.
I would say, yeah, if you're changing the ratio, which I'm actually going to do soon, like I'm just going to, I mean, if you have a Trident, ideally, or an auto alk tester, just set the test to test more during that day and kind of try to do the calculation. I don't know about bicarb needing to dose twice as much, though. I've never.
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure
think that's true.
It's pretty similar your dose. It's just the pH difference.
And I think also that's another thing I was talking about with how we don't really measure alkalinity properly, and how, you know, adding the same weight for weight bicarbonate and carbonate is going to affect your alkalinity differently, but it's a whole confusing thing. So hopefully I can get more clarity on this and actually talk about it with some certainty, but
educate the people.
Yeah.
It's honestly been so long since I've just straight up dosed those ones, because I've been using calcium reactors for so many years. But I've never paid attention at the end of the day. I mean, you know, test every week. And if your alk and calcium are stable, you're good. If one's going up or down, you know, dose more or less. I feel like a lot of people overcomplicate it. At the end of the day, like even with the numbers, is it trending upwards or downwards? It's going down, dose a little more. It's going up, dose a little less. And you can just tweak it based off that.
Totally.
Yeah. So don't obsess over the numbers. You know, don't necessarily chase numbers. Use them as more trends than anything. And I feel like that gets you a lot further along.
Yep. Totally.
Yep. Do you acclimate your corals in your tank?
I don't when I get new corals. I check the salinity and I rinse the coral in water from that tank. I just give it a swish and then it goes straight into the tank that it gets quarantined in.
Is there any corals that you would, you know, drip or acclimate, or most of them you just
No, I mean, the only thing that's going to wildly shock a coral that's, say, been imported or come from someone else's tank, I think, is a wildly different salinity.
That's fair.
I think, you know, it's probably unlikely that your alkalinity, even if your alkalinity is like 2 apart, like theirs is 9 and yours is 7, I don't think that's enough to kill a coral. I mean, you think about how many frags, you know, you or I have gotten over the years from different sets of water with completely different sets of chemistry.
Yeah.
And like, if you could go and take your tank and go like, okay, my tank is going to be Devon's water all of a sudden. I bet most stuff would be like, meh.
I agree.
You know, it would be like this huge difference.
I feel like an anemone might care because it's full of the old water. I don't know if it would make a difference. Maybe there's a pH difference, but I feel like most things aren't as big of a deal.
Yeah, I couldn't explain the whole acclimating thing super well, but I know sort of Jake Adams talked about this, is corals self-acclimate. They have the ability to sort of, through their membranes, kind of like they figure it out for themselves. And I wonder if that's a thing that's adapted in the ocean from coral reefs having different salinities from rain and runoff and, you know, different things changing. Like maybe they just have evolved this ability to to do that. One thing I would say that's interesting is actually the guys at Shoreline were showing me this. They acclimate their acros by so they unbag them and then they keep them out of the water for like I think 10 or 15 minutes.
Really?
And I guess something about them being just slightly dehydrated. I'll have to ask Rob about this because he can explain it better.
I'm going to ask him afterwards.
But it has something to do with like that whole membrane thing where I guess they just kind of are better at accepting the new water from being kind of not really dried out, but being
out of water for like 10 minutes.
Yeah. I've seen them do it. I've seen them bring in orders and just they float them. I saw them all floating there on this piece of styrofoam, like floating face up, not in the tank, outside of the tank. I was like, did you guys mean to do that?
That's intentional.
Yeah.
Huh. I'm going to ask him about that later. I'm so curious. I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So that should answer that question. I mean, here's the thing, too, is if you are super worried about something that's like a really high-end piece and you just want to like absolutely knock it out of the park, sure, drip acclimate it if you want. But also consider that if that coral is not getting as good a flow as it would in your tank, like, you know, that's why like I don't even, when I'm importing stuff and it's going in the quarantine, I don't dip it the first day I get it. I let it sit for a couple days and then it gets dipped. You know, because I'd rather just the coral, just like the stress get flushed out and then, you know.
I've lost more coral from dipping it when it freshly shows up than not. And again, same thing with just the extra stress on coral. So, I mean, perfect world, you have a quarantine tank where it can, you know, chill it for a few days, then you dip it before it goes in your main system. I know you use like your LPS system, you know, for the acros, which is a great way to do it. But, you know, perfect world, everyone would have that extra tank. But again, not everyone can.
Yeah, totally.
Lucas, thanks for the super chat. Thank you guys for the awesome content. Frag, thank you for the seduction zoas. They finally started to split.
Nice. Yeah, I shipped him some stuff a couple months ago, I think.
Nice.
Yeah. What other, like, you know, complexity versus simple kind of things do people do? I mean, there's lots of additives that I think kind of draw us into thinking that, you know, making this change or starting to use this product is going to have some magical effects on our corals. And rarely do I really notice anything specifically.
Do you think anything you dose adds to magic?
Well, I mean, I can say that there was a point where flatworm stop did really turn some of my acros around, but now that I think back on it, I must have had low iodine and potassium or something like that, and that was in that solution. You know, I don't think it was, you know, again, I don't think it was the wormwood whatever concoction. I think aminos can have a pretty good effect on tanks that are nutrient deficient. But I think aminos can actually feed some of the bad bacteria in a tank that is, I don't know, higher nutrient or heavily stocked. I think aminos can do some bad things too. So I like the idea of just reefing in a really simple way. Like, you know, say you just use the Tropic Marin system and you just use their salt, their fouling method, their trace additive, and you just kind of keep it all exactly kind of to that system, and you don't mess around with any bottles of any other crap, you know? Like, I like that idea. You know, I know like Leo Dembre and Leonardo's Reef, that's what he does. He doesn't really use a lot of other products. He's tried a lot of stuff, you know, but
I'm bad for jumping and trying different things, but it's like I'm like, let's do a dash of this week. Let's do a little of this week. You know, like maybe it's filling in voids, maybe it's pointless. I mean, sometimes it's hard to know.
And my thing is like I want to learn from this. So you know, an element I've never dosed to my tank is sulfur. So you know, I saw in my ICP that sulfur is below natural seawater range. So I was like, I mean, I don't know what the biological function of the sulfur is, but I was like, let's get it up to natural seawater and see if things look better. You know, because it's worth doing it, I think. So in my case,
how diligent are you on actually only doing that, nothing else, and seeing?
I think it's the only thing I've done in the last couple weeks. Yeah. Although when I got my ICP, I did make some adjustments to some of the trace that was low. So. But I've done those same adjustments before on previous tests, so I kind of know what that does.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm curious if anybody else has added sulfur and noticed the difference.
I don't think I've ever dosed sulfur unless it's been
Yeah.
part of something I dose, but not on its own.
Yeah, because one element Chummingham's Reef was talking about was rubidium and his mushrooms doing a lot better. And then the other thing reported is that you get a lot harder growth out of your SPS with rubidium too. Like the calcification is more kind of strong or robust or whatever.
Strontium's big on that one too. I know about rubidium affecting it.
Yeah, and I think fluoride as well. Yeah, totally. What else? As far as have I changed anything? Nah.
But okay, what do you think? Do you think this overcomplicates it, or do you think it adds redundancy? Because I know we both have a mix of calcium reactors and calc and dosing.
I mean, I think if you have a system that is loaded with coral, and where if one of those systems was to fail, you would have a massive swing. I think it's probably a good idea to use two methods. I mean, you could argue that two methods, there's two chances of something going wrong with them. But in my experience, I think it saved me some pretty major swings by having, because my calcium reactor gets blocked probably once every 2 months or, it's like a few times a year for sure.
Gotta give it a little love. Well, that's fair.
Yeah.
The question that I don't know the answer to, again, I also agree it adds a bit of redundancy to it. And again, if you need to dose more or less, you just pick one system and up or lower it a little bit. But I do wonder if it does mess with the ionic balance a bit. I don't know how I'd verify that, but that's the one thing I always question a little bit.
Yeah, I would say as far as two-part solutions, the thing I always recommend new hobbyists to use is ESV. I've just seen so many systems do awesome on ESV. So if you're just going to do one dosing system, I mean, it sounds like the All for Reef is pretty promising too.
I will let you know.
So yeah,
it's in the mail. One day it will show up. Hopefully this week.
Yeah,
probably next week.
Nice.
Yeah. But yeah, one part ESV again. That's a 2-part. I really liked ESV when I used it, especially if you just buy the 4 or 5 gallon bucket and then you're set for ages on a regular tank.
Yeah, on a regular tank.
You're that lasts me 1 month.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy.
Producer Reef, what causes the green in corals even though the parameters are spot on? Corals to turn green? Isn't elevated iron can affect that and a few other things?
Yeah, I mean, iron will green out SPS if it's elevated, but I think there are other factors that can make acros go green too. I mean, especially if it's an acro that is something like Rainbow Loom that's kind of, to put it simply, it's green with pink tips, but it's got, a fade of other color in it. But if the tips aren't actively growing, then the coral's just going to be green, and those active tips you're going to lose that pink because that color's in the growth tip. Yeah. But if your corals are going green that shouldn't even be green, I mean, I would say it could be to do with iron. It could be a nutrient thing. It could be bacteria, but I mean, I would just do an ICP just to be sure.
Yeah. One other, I guess, thought on the simple versus complex, chasing pH. I have dual thoughts on this one. One thought is, you are semi-overcomplicated if you are chasing pH. That being said, I feel that a slightly elevated pH is a bit of a buffer in your system. If you have a more acidic water and low pH, I feel like stuff can affect your corals quicker and they could go downhill faster. If you have a higher pH, it's less of an issue. But on the flip side, from my personal experience, I've been chasing pH, blah, 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 and it used to be chronically low, and now it's been elevated, and now I'm at the point where I'm my corals grow too fast. They're growing to the glass. It's almost a pain in the butt now because they grow so much. If you're selling core, you don't care. But for an average reef tank, it can be a bit of a pain. It's should I still, do I still want to keep it elevated? But I'm it's good for the health of the coral. That's something that's probably overcomplicating, and I could not worry about it. My life would be easier, but...
Now you're stuck using calc for the rest of your life.
Oh my gosh.
Like I said before.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not. There might be a way to ease off of it if you want to stop. But yeah, I feel like calc kind of, elevated pH, say if you're in the 8.5, 8.6 kind of peak range, you're kind of driving in the fast lane. It's you're going to get there faster, but it's more dangerous. There's more potential hazards. Yeah, and I've heard reports of growth actually being less hard and robust as well, with higher pH, which you'd think inside, when the coral's creating its skeleton, the higher pH would actually, you know, I would think it would form harder growth, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
the other thing too is calc. Like I do use calc partially for pH, but if it also does help with phosphates a bit. So I'm like, oh, are my phosphates going to shoot up if I quit dosing my 4 to 6 liters a day?
Hmm.
Probably.
Yeah, it's
But
possible.
but now you're making
But,
me question if I should stop it and see.
yeah, I mean, I would ease off of it.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that discontinue a method or whatever, just, ease off. But yeah, someone was telling me that if you want to stop calc and if, say you're doing slurry, like you should actually redo your plumbing.
Yeah.
You should like, do a complete clean vinegar of the sump and like clean
Yeah.
all the surfaces possible. Yeah.
I've actually been debating that. It's going to be a ton of work, and I don't know if I want to do it, but I keep debating giving my sump like a sterile clean. Like there's so many little like things growing in there, and my pristine sump has like 8,000 little white crustacean dots and
Hmm.
tube
Hmm.
worms and all that stuff. Like part of me wants to pull it off and citric acid it and just like pristine it, but that's going to be so much work.
Yeah, and at the same time, a lot of those
Yeah.
little small organisms might be part of what makes the system function,
Yeah.
the way it does.
I know. It
It's
could
always
be
a
trouble.
trade-off.
Could
Yeah.
be trouble.
Yeah.
Tap water mix reef. Do you recommend running carbon 24/7? I don't. Periodically, I run carbon. Now, I also run ozone, so that does a lot of the job of carbon. Carbon makes your water look clear. It can remove any funky smells. It can remove coral toxins. There's lots of good to carbon.
Hmm.
But it can also suck out trace elements, and it can also suck out some good stuff. So that is a consideration. Supposedly too much carbon can do head and lateral line in some tangs. Like there is some potential other stuff.
Yeah.
I used to run it more often. Now that I run ozone, I periodically will run it, but for the most part, I don't anymore because ozone breaks down toxins. It clarifies my water. It removes any funky smells. So it removed all the reasons that I needed to use carbon in the first place, and I don't have another consumable. So periodically, I will run it, but not very often. So, yeah.
Yeah, carbon, I mean, I think carbon is really active for the first couple days, but it peters off pretty fast, you know. Yeah. And it does mess with your iodine. I think it depends on the kind of carbon you're using, but it will pull a bit of iodine out. So yeah, I'm periodic about it. I throw a little actually in my filter socks.
Yeah.
And I just like kind of let it just bounce around in there. There's not much to it.
If you do if your water's really yellow, like if you do put a piece of paper the opposite on your tank and it's super yellow, then running some carbon probably doesn't hurt. But if your water's nice and clear anyways, and use it more as a tool. If you dump something in your tank that shouldn't be in there, people are spraying cleaners around your room, maybe carbon can pull the nasties. So I use it more as a tool like that than a staple. So it kind of depends. All right, buddy. Anything else you want to hit up before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I mean, I was just scanning my kind of general notes, and I mean, as far as I guess maybe a final note is that just like people should just reef how they want, and
I agree.
don't be too swayed by pictures of things online or But if you want to do that, like you can do that. Like nobody's judging anyone.
No. The biggest thing is there is 1,000 different ways to reef, and there's 1,000 different things that work. And if you are going to copy my method or Adam's method or some other random method, if you're copying someone that has a successful system, it is good to try and pick one person, copy it, not try and take 10 different people's and mix them together. I mean, it might work, it might not. There's a lot of ways to be successful in the hobbies, but yeah.
Totally. Yeah, get a good mentor, learn from them.
Yep.
Yeah, totally.
Reefkeeper Phil, so glad you talked about ozone all the time. So happy with on my big tank, amazingly clear water. Yeah, if you have a large system, it really does work wonders. I always tell people, don't overdo it, run just enough. But if you do, it's magical in the benefits. Great stream, guys. Good to see Adam. Loving the podcast, mate.
Sweet.
Thanks, Ricky. All right,
Thanks,
guys.
All right.
Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, hit the thumbs up, subscribe, share all that fun stuff. Lucas, Woody's gamer tag. Thank you guys for the super chats. Much appreciated. If you haven't checked out Adam's podcast, Beyond the Reef, super awesome podcast where he talks other, coral sellers and hardcore reefers. So it's always a good listen as well. So get your fix in between the live streams with the Beyond the Reef podcasts. And dun dun dun. There you go. Double the goodness. Look for that logo. But yeah, I know it's an awesome podcast. So shout out to that. All right, guys. Have a good night. And we'll catch you guys next week's live stream.
Right on. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.